But what we need to begin with is this, and it is that we face a constant battle with an enemy who wants to replace God with an idol. And so when we can, or when the enemy can convince us that God can be replaced by an idol, then God has been displaced. And so we would look around our world today, and maybe we need to more specifically look around our life today and say, is that something that I'm tempted to do? Is there a temptation in my life to take that which is something maybe not necessarily bad, something good, and elevate it to a God status in my life? And so the reason that it's become so dangerous for us today is because we don't see it as such, we don't recognize it as such. And so what happens? Well, our job gets elevated to idol status. That becomes our God. The job that I have, the work that I'm doing. Maybe relationships can be that way. We can take sports and it becomes an idol for us. Anything that we would embrace to the degree that we have used it to push and replace God, now we have elevated it to an idol status. Isaiah chapter 44, when I was telling this story a little bit ago, this was the scripture I was referencing. A woman who served teaching young women internationally, across the globe. And they would read this story, and she said the girls would always giggle when they would read this story. But here's what it says in Isaiah chapter 44. Starting at verse 16, half of it burns in the fire, over the half he eats meat, he roasts and is satisfied. Did I skip? I skipped verse 14. He cuts down cedars, or he chooses a cypress tree or an oak, and lets it grow strong among the trees of the forest. He plants a cedar, and the rain nourishes it. Then it becomes fuel for a man. He takes a part of it and warms himself. He kindles a fire and bakes bread. Also, he makes a god and worships it. He makes it an idol and falls down before it. Half of it burns in the fire. Over the half he eats meat. He roasts it and is satisfied. Also, he warms himself and says, "Aha, I am warm. I have seen the fire." And the rest of it he makes into a god, his idol, and falls down to it and worships it. He prays to it and says, "Deliver me, for you are my God." They know not, nor do they discern, for he has shut their eyes, so that they cannot see, and their hearts, so that they cannot understand. No one considers, nor is there knowledge or discernment to say, half of it I burned in the fire. I also baked bread on its coals. I roasted meat and have eaten, and shall I make the rest of it an abomination? Shall I fall down before a block of wood? He feeds on ashes. A deluded heart has led him astray. And he cannot deliver himself or say, is there not a lie in my right hand? So he gives us this picture, and it is kind of a humorous picture, where a guy cuts down a tree, and he takes half of the tree, and he builds a fire with it, cooks his dinner, and then he takes the part that's left over, and he carves it an image of it, and he begins to worship it. He begins to fall down and worship it. Now, that's the image we generally have of idolatry, and certainly Old Testament idolatry. And so we read that and we think, I would never do that. My son-in-law Sam is kind of an accomplished carver. He can take a block of wood and he can do some kind of cool things with it but you know what I've never seen him do? Unless this is after I've left, I've never seen him worship it. I've never seen Sam put that on his shelf and worship it. I mean the insanity of that, and yet that's the picture that we get of the Old Testament people. I'm going to take half of the wood, I'm going to use it for one thing, I'm going to take the rest, I'm going to turn that into my God, I'm going to worship it. And we read that and think, that is insane. And we think, that could never happen to me. Well, Paul, in Romans chapter 1, maybe brings it into if not a current cultural context, certainly into an early church New Testament context. Because he says this, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. And so we understand this. We're talking about people who rejected God. They've looked, God has made the world, he's created the universe. We can look at the stars, and that in itself is enough information to tell us that there is a God and he made this. He's saying that you cannot look at this world and not understand that someone had to make this. Someone had to create this world. And so we find how that leads into idolatry in the next couple of verses. He says in verse 21, "For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things." He's saying the image of God we've rejected. In fact, he's saying these people looked at the stars and the universe, the galaxies, the sunrise, the sunset. They looked at the miracle of life. They looked at all of that, and they rejected that. And it says they exchanged that for something else. And it's something that has to do with the creation, the created, I mean. And so what we're going to do is we are going to find the answer to the unanswerable question of where did the creation come from by saying, well, it came from the creation. That's the logical answer. If there is no God, then this had to emerge from itself. And so that's what we get. That's the idolatry that we face today. We begin to worship the creation instead of the Creator. And so the idolatry that becomes obvious and apparent in our world today is related to that. And it's why when you look at all the climate people, that they are the most religious people that I know. They're very, very faith-oriented. In fact, I saw some over in, I think was it in Germany? I forget where it was. It was over in Europe somewhere, where they were lined up on the highway, and they're blocking the road. And finally, people got so mad they're like kicking them to get them out of the way. But they're like, man, that's faith. I am going to go block the Autobahn with my body. Even if somebody comes up and kicks me, I'm not moving out of the way because I am so believing in this system that's been fed to me. That's idolatry. That is making the created the idol. And so we would look at created things, and they would become the things that we would make an idol out of. And that would be our jobs, maybe our families, sports, all those kind of things that we would elevate to a place that would in some way supplant God, that would remove the necessity of God. And so we would look at this, and I would say this about every one of you. You would hear what I'm saying, and you would say this: I would never replace God with an idol. I would never push God out of the way in order to embrace an idol. But here's what you might do. You might be more tempted to do. And it would be to bring your idol and to place it on the shelf with God. To place it with this thinking, and there's your next point, and it is that we believe that we're okay as long as God remains on the shelf with our idol. And so we continue in our idolatry with the idea that I'm still worshiping God, I still love God, I'm still going to church on Sunday, and we would even deny that an idol exists while we treat it in an idolatrous way. Several years ago, was talking to the pastor who was at, Pastor Todd, who was at Cassville at the time, and he lamented to me the idolatry of children. Now that kind of makes us maybe a little uncomfortable when we hear that. But he said he was struggling in his church because there were parents who idolized their children. And so their children became that which they served. That which was most important in their life wasn't God, but it was their children, and getting them involved in all the right activities, making sure they were in all the places they needed to be. And so understanding that, in the same way that the Philistines were comfortable putting their God on the shelf with another God, maybe we need to think and consider whether or not we might be doing that same thing ourselves. The reason for that is that we want God's blessing. We want the good things from God. And so, if we can look at the Philistines who thought that having that ark there would be of some value to them, it would give them benefit. And so we want it there. And so when we start to idolize things in our life, and yet we want God present in this, we understand this, that, well, as long as God's there, he'll bring good things. I just want him there. I don't want him like controlling my life, but I want to have some say over the good things that happen in my life. And I think that'll happen as long as I have God there on the shelf with the other things that I idolize. Tommy Nelson's a pastor, and he spoke of this in regards to our country. And he said this. He said, all over our country we sing, God bless America, but nobody wants to worship him. That's the idolatry, maybe even the idolatry of patriotism, where we want God. We want God bless America, and we make that demand of him or make that request of him. But apart from that, there's no bowing the knee to him. There's no serving him. It's just simply this request, this demand that God somehow be present. We got him on the shelf, and we're going to use him when we need him. But we really don't want to get to that point where he truly rules and commands our life. And so what we see in this story is going to be true in our own life too, and it is this, and it is that God is not going to share space with your idol. God does not want on the same shelf as your idol. And in the story, this kind of humorous story where Dagon gets knocked off the shelf in the middle of the night, in some way, God's going to work in your life in that same way. If there is an idol in your life, you need to understand this, and it is that God is working to remove the idols from your life. God is working to accomplish that and get those idols out of your life. Now, we would look at this and wonder in the story, why in the story of Dagon, the god Dagon, why is there like one time it falls off one time, day goes by, and then it falls the next day, and the arms break off, the head breaks off. Why is God doing that? Why does it work that way? And it's interesting because when they first are confronted with this, when they first come in, their first thought is, we have to put God back on the shelf. And there's something kind of interesting about that, kind of funny about that. That if this is God, if this is the living God who is all-powerful, he doesn't need help getting back up on the shelf. He really wouldn't need that. He should have been able to withstand whatever it was that knocked him off the shelf, or miraculously lift himself back up onto the shelf. But no, he needs the help of people to get back into his place of prominence. And so when that happens in our life, when God successfully removes the idol to Dagon here, the enemy is going to quickly attempt to replace it. And that same thing's true in your life. When you struggle with some type of idol, whatever it might be, there's going to be an attempt. There's going to be an attempt by the enemy to quickly replace that. Whether it's going to be with the exact same thing or something else that you can elevate to that place. I gotta tell you that I can very easily fall into an idolatrous relationship with sports. And it's evident to me in the way that I behave when the game doesn't turn out how I want. I can be a complete idiot when it comes to the way I respond when the game's not going like I want it to be going. And for that reason, a number of years ago, we got rid of all our cable and all that kind of stuff. And I've shared before, I hadn't watched a Penn State game in years. But here, I don't know, 6 months ago, so I kind of fell off the wagon and started watching games again. Started watching the Pirates, watching them pretty regularly. And of course, the Pirates aren't the best team to watch if you want to be excited and happy and cheering. And so anyway, I find myself how easy it is for me to slip back into this and really begin to move these sporting events on TV up to a high level of importance in my life. I have to be careful with that. Because as quickly as God removes that idol, there is a push for me to fall back into that, lifting those things into idolatrous places in my life. And so in the same way that we see here, it's going to be true in our life too. There's going to be this constant attempt for that to come back, whatever it might be that you find yourself drawn towards. And so what happens then is we might ask this question. Why does God not just destroy Dagon in the beginning? Why didn't he just bust his head off and his hands off from the very start? Why does he give them that chance? He removes it and they put it back and then he destroys it. Then he breaks it. And I don't know what they would do at that point because really all that's left is kind of like the torso. He's lost his head and his hands. And so what are they thinking? What's God thinking? Why is that? I mean, God knows us well enough. Wouldn't it be better if he had just destroyed it in the beginning? Brought the tumors and everything on right away? Wouldn't that have been the quickest way to solve this? I think the answer is what we see in so many things in our life in regards to sin. And it is that God is patient in regards to our idols because of his grace. It's because of his patience. It's because of his mercy. And though he sees that I have an idolatrous relationship with sports or my motorhome or whatever it is that I'm lifting into a kind of a spiritual nature in my life, God's grace is helping me through that, giving me the space to be able to repent and to walk away from that idol in my life. And so I think we're looking at that here in regards to the Philistines. So we might say, well, the Philistines were a godless people. These weren't God's chosen people. Why would he be that way? Well, God's grace and mercy extends beyond just his chosen people, right? Paul sent the gospel to the Gentiles. We are a product of that today. God's grace and mercy is to the vilest of people. And so understanding that helps us to understand why God has these times where it doesn't seem like he's doing anything, because he's patiently waiting on people to repent. But we can know this, and it is that God will eventually destroy the idols in your life. He's eventually going to do that. And you might even come to the point where it has to be removed from you, where you don't have a choice. God destroyed the idol that was Dagon. He'll destroy our idols at some point. As Christians, our idols, God will deal with them in some way. And just as we see Dagon is destroyed, certainly ours will be destroyed again. And so we see this one more thing that happens, though. It's not enough just to destroy the idols. What also happens is there's judgment on those who practice idolatry. The judgment for the Philistines were the boils, and it even seems death was present. The city was in a turmoil. People were angry. Things were kind of a mess here for a period of time while they decided what they were going to do with the Ark of the Covenant. before they finally came to their senses and said, we got to get this out of here. Because they even use this terminology. The hand of God is too hard on it, is hard on us, is what he said. And so for in our own life, the same thing. Eventually, idolatry is going to lead to the judgment of God. God will judge us in some way. And I don't mean eternally. If we're a follower of Christ, it's not what I'm talking about. But he will judge us here on the earth. Something's going to happen in regards to the things that we are lifting into idol status, in regards to what God does to us and through us. And so God will eventually judge those who practice idolatry. And so if there's something in your life, my hope is that you're prayerful about this, and you really ask God to show you, are there things in my life that I am lifting into idol status? Are there things that I'm idolatrous about? And pray that prayer, and that God would reveal that to you. For what reason? So that you can repent. So you can move away from those idols and really avoid the judgment that will come if you continue in that direction. And so God eventually will judge those who practice idolatry, whether we're talking about Old Testament Dagon, or whether we're talking about the idolatry that's present in the world today. You know, as I was studying this today, I was thinking about the history of humanity, and thinking about it just over the last century or so, and the idea of or even if we go back maybe a couple thousand years, we were at a point where it was the age of reason, where everything had to be described, everything had to be understood naturalistically, rationally. There had to be a natural, rational explanation. And where did that lead us? Where did that lead people to? Well, that led us to Darwinism. That became the explanation. There has to be a rational, natural explanation for this, and that led us to Darwinism. That became our idol. That elevated into God's place. In fact, I would say this: the most hardcore, ardent Darwinist is an atheist. I don't know anybody who truly, fully is all committed to the beliefs of Darwinism that believes in God. Because Darwinism is the idol that supplants God, that removes God. And so we dealt with that. And then we moved into the 20th century with Nazism. What were they looking at? Well, the superiority of humanity. Again, this whole idea of humanism, and that man can be made perfect. Again, pushing aside God. All of those things. And what do they always lead to? It always leads to death and destruction. All the whole movement of communism in the same way. All of those ideas, all those ideologies are idols that in some way are intended to push aside God. And they in some way successfully did that in the world. And in all of those, those are the idols that eventually God destroyed. I mean, maybe they still exist in a sense, but have been destroyed in many, many ways over the years.